Today's daf is daf Yud, daf 10. Hi Charlie and Bava Metzia. And the Mishnah yesterday, so the Mishnah we're actually in the middle of a sugya, but I hope everyone's still holding on their hats. So the Mishnah yesterday, today's daf Yud, daf 10, but the Mishnah yesterday in daf Tet, on a bet, talked about a person is riding on a behema, and he sees a object that's found, right? He sees a valuable thing on the ground that is not owned by anyone. And he says to somebody else, I guess because he can't get off his animals, the simplest explanation, right? It's hard to get out of his car. Says somebody else, can you pick it up for me? Right? So the Mishnah said if that other person picked it up for him and then said, I want to keep it, that other person gets to keep it. It's not considered to be a done deal for him. So we had a machloket yesterday about peah, which is a very similar thing, right? The person is poor, they go to a field, they're allowed to collect the things in the field. We're here, Rosa. And the machloket by peah was that there's machloket tanaim about if one person picks up peah for another person, whether in fact he can keep that peah, right? Whether in fact that belongs to the other person or not belongs to the other person. And we thought it was a similar machloket, right? So yesterday, we tried to understand, Rav Nachman asked Ula, right, whether or not this machloket is what's called anila ani, meaning a person who has access to it, picking it up for another person's access to it, which when it comes to a metzia, to an object that's found, every person has access to it, right? So a lost object is equally ownerable by anyone who picks it up. And so that was one opinion yesterday. So says the Gemara now, we're on the top of Daf Yud Amud Aleph, okay? Amar, third line. Asked the Gemara, the question that we ended with yesterday was, our Mishnah is not going like Rabbanan or Rebbe Eliezer. So so he said back to him, this was a question that Rav Nachman asked Ula, what he said back to him was, Matnitin da Amar Tchila. Our Mishnah, remember again, the case in our Mishnah is, a person finds a Metzia, right, riding on a horse. I see a beautiful diamond ring on the ground, and I can't get off my horse to get it. So I say to someone who's walking next to me, can you pick it up for me? The guy picks it up and he says, wow, this is a beautiful diamond ring. I want this. So the question is, does picking it up, and Mishnah said, if it doesn't matter, the person who picked it up is allowed to keep it, not the one who saw it first, right? No finders keepers, as they say, right? So what about the case of peah? So said Ula.
I'm doing this case of teacher right now.
Said Ula to Rav Nachman, right? Matnitin damar tchila. The Mishnah is only where the person who picked it up, let's call the person who picked it up Ruvain, right? And the guy riding the horse is Shimon. It's only where Ruvain says, when I picked it up for myself originally. I didn't pick it up for you, Shimon, and then I saw how beautiful it is, and now I want to keep it. Because if that had been the case, then picking it up for Shimon would give it to Shimon. You can't then change your mind. But when I picked it up originally, tchila, I wanted it for myself. And says the Gemara in the fourth line, Achinami mistaver, that actually makes a lot of sense in the Mishnah. The Ktanik is the end part of the Mishnah. The Seifa of the Mishnah says that im mishenatnalo, if after Ruvain picks it up, hands it to Shimon, he then says, wait a second, give it back to me. I got it first, right? Amar ani zachiti batchila, lo amar klum. If he says, I got it first, then he doesn't say anything. Now, why did he say the word tchila b'seifa lamali? Why do you say the word, we are 6 lines from the top of Daf Yud Amud Aleph, why say the word tchila in the Sefer? I mean, I picked it up originally. Of course I picked it up originally. Right? Again, the case is Reuven picked it up, handed it to Shimon, and then says to Shimon, okay, give it back to me now because I want it. Obviously it means, and he says, I want it, meaning I picked it up for myself. Because if I didn't pick it up for myself, why would you give it back to me? Right? So why do you have to add the word, I picked it up for myself originally? Just say, I picked it up, right? So I should get to keep it. It must be pshita. Well, it says, sorry, 7 lines. Even if he didn't say the word tchila, you understand his implication is give it to me because I picked it up originally. Ella, why did the Mishnah say the word tchila? Hakamash Milan, Reisha, the Amar tchila, that the beginning of the Mishnah is also where he said tchila. And so the reason we say tchila in the Seifa of the Mishnah is to tell you that in the beginning he also said, I got it for myself originally. And so the case of the first part of the Mishnah is where Ruvain picks it up for himself. And that's where the Mishnah says Shimon can't demand it from Reuven. Reuven picked it up. It was a Metzia. It was an unowned object. Whoever picks it up gets it. And that's where Reuven is able to be koneh, right? So that is the chiddush. The idach, now the response to that from the
But the Mishnah did not say techila in the Reisha.
It doesn't say the word techila, right? But so
You're
that's
just assuming that.
ambiguous. But the reason the Mishnah is there to teach you Tchila and the Seifa to tell you that the Reisha also would only be true if he said Tchila. The Idach, now the counter argument, of course, is that the Mishnah is very clear the other way. That Tana Seifa Ligluya the Reisha, right? That the reason you say the word Tchila in the Seifa, which is unnecessary, because obviously if I go to the Shimon after I gave it to him and said, give it back to me, it's because I'm saying to him, I picked it up for myself first. The purpose of saying that in the Seifa is to say, notice, we didn't say it in the Reisha. So it actually is teaching you the exact opposite halacha, that you're wrong. And that if you pick it up, even without the intention for yourself, you pick it up for somebody else. But before you give it to that person, you change your mind and want to keep it, you're allowed to keep it. Why is that? Because we're going to see, the opinion is that if you pick up something that's hefker, so it's you give it to someone else, but it harms someone else, right? It's not a kinyan. So the Amar Reisha Sefer Amar Tchila, Reisha Amar Tchila. And that, in fact, is the opinion now of Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda. Very fundamental. We've been speaking about this for the last 3 days, so this is our sort of summation of these opinions. Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda, who were two really, really, very senior Rabbanim, said in Bava, the Amri Tervayo, they both say, and we're now 10 lines from the top at the star, Hamagbia Metzia Chavero. If you pick up a found object, again, a Metzia here means a hefker object, something that is there. We're going to see in the next parak about when you have to return Metziot, right? But in this case, it's considered to be totally hefker. Anyone who gets it gets to keep it. If Ruvain picks that up for Shimon, lo kana chavero. It's not owned by Shimon, and Ruvain can change his mind. And if Ruvain doesn't want it, and Shimon doesn't want it, anyone else could come get it, right? It's not owned. So let's say Ruvain's walking, an example I like to use, we lost Charlie for a minute, is that Ruvain's walking down the street and he sees a beautiful little kitten, and he doesn't like cats because he's allergic to them, but his friend Shimon loves cats, right? So he says, I'm going to pick up this cat for Shimon. He doesn't want it for himself. Says Rav Nachman, it doesn't matter. It doesn't belong to Shimon, and anyone else could come and grab it out of your hands, right? Or take it away from you until someone else gets it. So that case, says Rav Nachman, Rav Chisda, you cannot. My time up. Why? Because havi tofes the balchov makom shechav la'achirim. It's the equivalent to, let's say someone owes you money, right? And they're in Las Vegas about to spend their life savings. So you run to them and say, I'm grabbing back my money, right? In order for you to pay me back. That you can do, presumably. This is how Rashi understands it. But if you don't owe, the man doesn't owe you any money, but you know that he owes your friend $1,000 and he's about to spend his last penny. So you go over and you grab $1,000 from him to give to your friend who he owes. The problem is that he owes money to other people as well. So that's called tofes the balchov. You're grabbing something for another person who's owed a debt, but it's in a place, and we're reading inside now, it damages, or he owes money to other people too. So he's got a lot of people he owes money to, Ruvain, let's say, and Shimon goes over and grabs money for somebody else, and says, Rav Nachman Rav Chisda, hatofes the balchov makom shechav la'achirim lo kana. That's a principle we've had several times already, that if you grab something for one debtor in a place where other people are owed, you do not acquire it because this money is owed to many people. So you don't have a right to go and take it. Says Rav Nachman Rav Chisda, it's the same thing with the Metzia. There's an object on the floor that's ownerless. Essentially, it can be acquired by anybody in the world. If you go and say, I want to acquire it for Shimon, that harms Levi, Yehuda, and everyone else. And therefore, you cannot make a kinyan for somebody else. You can make a kinyan for yourself, but you can't make a kinyan for somebody else by doing that action. Okay? Unblur this. Okay, that's Rav Nachman Rav Chisda. Eitvei Rav Nachman, asked Rav Nachman, what about the following Braita? It says, Mitziat po'el la'atzmo. Fascinating case. A person is an employee, he's a worker, he's harvesting fields for his friend, and he sees a beautiful linen scarf in the tree next door. So he goes, and he picks up the scarf, right? Says the Braita later, he gets to keep it himself. It doesn't belong to his owner, not his owner, his employer, sorry, right? Now, of course, Rashi points out, as Gemara will, that he's got to pay his employer for the time it took him to go and get the scarf and climb down the tree, right? Because, he's being paid for the day or the hour. That's not part of the day, but he gets to keep the scarf. Says the Braita, that's only where when he was hired, the Balabayit said to him, dig with me today. Ader nachish is, digging. Ader imi today, weed with me today. Hayom. meaning he's being hired to paint the house, right? So picking up scarves is not part of his responsibilities. Aval amarlo, but if the balabayit came to him and drove by in the morning and said, "Asay imi melacha hayom," I want to hire you for the day. I need a lot of jobs done around the house. Come and work for me for the day. If he says that, then you're working for him for the day is basically you're his employee for the whole day, and anything you find is his. He goes to the owner. So then mitziato shel balabayit. Metzia belongs to the balabayit, right? And so that's the bright that we're going to say later. Now the question, of course, is what do you mean Metzia to the balabayit? If he goes down and picks up the scarf, right? He's basically picking up a Metzia, a scarf, for the balabayit, and you're saying it's owned by the balabayit, but you can't be zacha on something that's chav la'achirim. So how could an employee who pick up a scarf and say it automatically goes to the balabayit if you can't do something that's a Metzia for other people? Amar Leis, Rav Nachman answered, well, that's different. Because a poel is not really a shliach, right? A pshani poel, a worker, the yado ki yad bal habayatu. That a poel is essentially an extension. His hand is the hand of the bal habayit. You've been hired by the bal habayit to work for him for the day, which means everything you do during this day is owned by the bal habayit.
Isn't every shaliach like that too?
But that's a shliach. No, employee is different. Employee, you have a responsibility. And so anything you find, any work you do, you can't go at the end of the day to the bal habayit and say, I made this beautiful pottery today. I want to keep it. I invest in it. Sure, you invest in it. I paid you money. You're my employee. And so essentially, it's not as if you're a shliach picking it up for somebody else. You're actually an agent, or maybe more than an agent, extension of the bal habayit. Says the Gemara.
You'd say that about his wife too. Anything she acquires, right?
I don't think we would say it about his wife. We would say it more because she's not an employee, so to speak. You do say it about his wife because you're saying whether she would be zocheh for him. Actually, it's a really good question. I'm not sure. You can't say it by someone who didn't send the shliach, right? The difference here might also be that you could say, even though the bal habayit doesn't know about the scarf, right? But that if someone intends to do it, it might be different. But I don't actually know by Ishto if you would consider that to be similar to a poel.
She finds something, right? Doesn't it belong to him?
Correct. The question is right. So the question is whether it belongs to her and everything she has belongs to him. Right? Is she picking it up for herself? But ultimately, herself means things that he owns, or is she a messenger for him? Is the question, right? But I guess let me give it some more thought. But it sounds to me on first thought that it would be similar, as you said. So that is the poel is yado k'bal habayit. Says Gemara, is that really true? That once you hire somebody, you basically own them? Can't they change their mind? Ask Gemara, but Amar Rav, didn't Rav teach us? We had this, remember, recently in the end of Bava Kama, poel yachol achzarba. That if you get hired to work, you can back out. It's not indenture, it's not slavery. And afilu b'chatzi hayom, even halfway through. Now you won't get paid presumably, right? But you can back out of your contract. So if you can back out of your contract, right, then how could you say my hand of the poel is like the hand of the bal habayit? Amar Le says Gemara, well, it's true you could back out of your contract. But kol kama d'lo hadamari, but as long as you didn't back out of your contract, you are the bal habayit. Yadoki yad bal habayit, right? Ki hadarbein, when you back out, the reason you're able to back out is, as we said, the end of Bava Kama, tama afrinihu. There's another rationale for that. It's based on the pasuk, again, as we quoted there in Bava Kama, where Hashem says, Ki li bat b'nei Yisrael avadim, right? You are my slave, says God, which we always darshan, avadaihim, you are Hashem's servants, v'lo avadim la avadim. You're not servants to others, right? And therefore, now of course you could become a servant, just to be clear. And if you are a servant, you can't back out, right? But if you're a worker, we don't treat workers as servants, right? We treat workers who are still in the employee of the bal habayit as the hand of the bal habayit, but they can always get out of it. So that is the explanation of the first of Rav Nachman. Reb Chia bar Abba said, in the name of Reb Yochanan, 3 lines from the Mishnah, that I disagree. Hamagbia mitzia lechavero kana chavero, right? If you pick up a mitzia for somebody else, that other person acquires it. If you do say, I'm doing this in order to give it to Rosa, right? Then I can't change my mind, presumably. Now, what about our Mishnah? Right? Our Mishnah said that if you say you're riding a donkey, right? I don't know what you were riding, just an animal, and you see a mitzia, and you say to someone, pick it up for me, and the person picks it up and says, I want to keep it, they can keep it. How could they keep it? Right? You said to them, pick it up for me. So remember earlier we answered this by saying you said tchila. But what about this? Rashi says we don't like that so much anymore. So it says the Gemara in Tomer Mishnah Tenu. You're going to ask him, Rabbi Yochanan, what about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah, if you noticed, is where you didn't say to the person, pick it up for me. What did you say in our Mishnah? Very interesting. Tineli, give it to me, right? Our Mishnah, the Amar Tinali, V'lo Amar Zachali. You didn't say pick it up on my behalf. You said get it and give it to me, implying you're basically just my hand. Hand it to me, and once I get it, I'll be kona. And I didn't intend to be kona the moment you picked it up, and therefore, since after you picked it up, you decided to keep it, and you never gave it to me, I was never kona this thing, and that's how you'd explain the Mishnah according to Rabbi Yochanan.
Is that why we use the expression zacha adam shelo b'fanav? Specifically the word zacha?
Yeah, so yeah, that's what correct. So the word zacha means acquire it essentially, as opposed to in our Mishnah, and that's Rabbi Yochanan's diak, where it says the word tina, bring it to me, and then I'll get it. And therefore, in our Mishnah, you're not koneh. But if you had said to a person zocheli, and the person did it for you, they can't then change their mind according to Rabbi Yochanan.
Even
Techila,
if he said
near the bottom
techila.
of Daf Yud.
Even if he said techila, he can't change his mind.
Okay. So it depends on whether you say right. So it's a little bit tricky, because it depends, I guess, on whether you say tchila after the fact or not, right? But yes, if you say tchila before you pick it up, you basically say, I'm picking this up for myself, then of course you're not kona for somebody else. But if you don't say it, then that's where Rabbi Yochanan seems to imply that the act of picking it up already was kona for the other person. You can't change the facts afterwards.
Oh, but the point, if he says techila and the first person says zachali, and the person that picks us up says techila, so there seems to be there's.
Yeah, so the word again, techila is not something that you necessarily say. It's it's not necessarily what you're doing. It's what you say. I picked it up for this originally.
Right.
The word techila means originally. So the question is, if you say before you pick it up, look, the guy says to you, go pick up that diamond ring for me. You say, no, I want the diamond ring for myself. Then clearly when you pick it up, you're picking it up for yourself, right? There's no question about that. You don't have to listen to them, right? And you can go grab it. There's no, I saw it first, I get it, right? That clearly is not the case here. The question is, if the Reuven picked it up for Shimon, let's say, and then afterwards says, no, I was picking up for myself, whether we believe him without saying the word, without making that intention clear. But that's not so clear according to Rabbi Yochanan. It seems presumably like you would not. Continues the Mishnah, the next case. Ra'at Metzia, right? We're all walking down the street and we see a beautiful, shiny something. I don't know, shiny ring we're going to go with. We're going to stick with that. And v'nafal aleh, and you jump on it, but you're not able to actually pick it up, right? I don't know, maybe it's squirming around under the ants. You jump on it, you can't pick it up. Uba acher v'hichzikba, and someone else comes. Avi told me the example of in the football scrum, where you jump on the ball, you didn't get possession, and somebody else came in and grabbed it out from under you. Zeh sheichzikba zachaba. The one who grabbed it is zocha, not the one who jumped on it, right? Meaning jumping on something, putting your body over something, let's say, is not possession. Picking it up is possession. Okay. Amar Reish Lakish. Now says Reish Lakish, and this Gemara is not connected to our Mishnah yet. We're going to see in a second it gets connected to the Mishnah. Says Reish Lakish, Misham Abba Kohen Bardala, or most change it here to Abba Kana Bardala. Right? Abba was a Kohen from Bardala, said the following: Arba amot shel adam konot lo b'chol makom. A person's, as they call it nowadays, personal space. Right? The 4 amot around the person is enough to acquire something wherever you are. One is going to question wherever you are. Meaning you have personal space. The same way that your chatzer, your yard, is you, and your picking something up is you, your space around you is considered to be you. And if you go to a object, a Metzia, like a lost thing, and you say, I want this, or this, I'm picking this up, or I'm taking this, and you're next to it, you would get it. My taima, Tekina Rabbanan, my taima, why is this? Tekina Rabbanan, de lo ati lansuye. The rabbis made this takana so that people wouldn't fight, right? Obviously, there's something that's found. Everyone wants it. There's a beautiful, delicious apple on the floor. But we don't want people to go jumping in, their faces into it. So we made a rule that personal space, whoever gets there first, in the first meeting within Arba Amod, gets to keep the thing. Okay, that was what Reish Lakish said, which seems to directly contradict our Mishnah, of course. So Amar Abaya, now Abaya said, Motiv Rav Chiya bar Yosef Peah. Chiya bar Yosef asked a question from the Mishnah in Peah. We'll see what it is in a second. And Rava said, Motiv Rav Yaakov bar Yidi Nizikin. Rav Yaakov asked a question from our Mishnah in Nizikin. Amar Abaya, said Abaya, Motiv Rav Chia bar Yosef Peah, because this is the Mishnah in the fourth parak of Peah. Says the Mishnah in Peah, very practical case, right? And Ani, remember, Peah is halacha, that you have to leave a corner of your field unharvested so that the poor people can come and collect it, right? Now, that's, of course, could be very lucrative for the poor people, right? You have a beautiful field of grain or whatever you grow. You leave off a very substantial size. Anyone who wants to come get it. So obviously they were lining up for days before to come and collect your payah. So this guy gets there that early that morning, and he discovers that your field is now harvested and is not harvested. The payah is left unharvested, right? And he says, I want all of this. I can't pick it all up. So Natal Miktzat Peah, he takes some of the pay, pulls off a few eaves, whatever it's called, of grain, Vizarak al Hashar. And he throws it over the rest and says, this is all mine. Right? Says the Mishnah, Ein lo ba klum. He doesn't get any of it, right? Because what he took, he threw away, and what he didn't touch is not his. So throwing your possession, saying this is all mine, doesn't mean anything, right? Continues the Mishnah, Nafal lo aleh. Let's say he jumps on top of it and spreads out his body so no one else can come and take it, but he didn't pick it up. Or paras talito aleh, or he brings his coat and he throws his coat over it, like you save the seats. Everyone does that at wherever you go. And says the Mishnah, mavirin oto himeno. It doesn't mean anything. It's not picking it up. So you can't jump on something or throw your coat on it and acquire it. And the same thing is true about shikha. What's your gerson? Omer shikha. Okay. So anyways, the same is true about shikha. Now that's the Mishnah in Peah. Now asked the Gemara, what's it called? Reb Chia bar Yosef from a biased quote of this on Reish Lakish. 4 lines to the bottom. If you say that a person's arba amot are koneh, so why isn't this person koneh the peah by actually putting his body there? You should give him 4 amot all around him, and he gets to keep what's under him and what's around him, right? So niknu le arba amot didei. His arba amot, his 4 amot, I don't know how to translate amot in English, his 4 cubits around him should be koneh for him, right? Says the Gemara, you're right. It's the fact is that a person can be koneh with quote unquote personal space. But the case in the Mishnah and Peah is the lo amar akni. He didn't say, I want to be koneh with my personal space. So if you wanted to, that is a mechanism of kinyan, just like picking something up. But that's not what happened. You jumped on it. Says in 1 second. Itakun Rabbanan, right? If it's a kanat Rabbanan that your space extends around you, what do you need to say it for? Kilo amar mayavi. So you didn't say it. So what if you didn't say it? It's a takanat Rabbanan that you own, that this is basically like your chatzer, right? Your property. If you own this property, if this is your space, then you should acquire everything within that space. That's where maybe that would be true if we didn't know what he was thinking. But now 2 lines from the bottom. Kiva denafla, since he actually used his body and jumped on top of it, Gali Adaita, it's clear that his thought process, this intention, is that he wants to acquire by falling on top of it. He thinks, I'll jump on it and it's mine. And that's a mistake, because jumping on something is not a way to acquire it. And therefore, he did not intend to acquire it with his Arba Amun, turn the page, and therefore, that is why he was not koneh the peah with his personal space, because he didn't intend to be koneh with his personal space. And since he didn't intend to, he intended to be koneh with his, sitting on top of it, that it's not a kinyan, and therefore the rule that arba amot, that 4 amot of a person is koneh, does not apply here. And so that is the answer, the first answer that the Gemara gave to the Mishnah of peah. Okay, says the Gemara on top now. Turn the page to Daf Yud Amud Bet. Rav Papa says, I got a whole other explanation, right? Why the Mishnah in Peah is not a contradiction to Reish Lakish. Because Kita Kinele Rabbanan Arba Amot, that's Be'alma, right? That is I always said the best gears here. Yeah. That is in general, right? In general, meaning in a place where there aren't necessarily other people, let's just say that's what it means, right? In which they're coming. It's in public, let's say, right? So you get the space around you. But Bisadet Balabayit, you're now going into somebody else's field. So you can't walk into somebody else's field and say, okay, I own the property all around me, right? Or I have Kenyans on the property all around me. They're lo tekina rabbanan. Now, of course, you are allowed to go into this field to take the payah. You're not stealing, right? But afal gav, the third line, dezacha leirachmana begava. Even though the Torah said you can go into that field and take the payah, kizacha leirachmana lahalucheba. Right, the permission from the Torah is to go into the field, v'lin kuti payah, and to harvest the payah. But to say this is my space, my personal space, there's no way. It's not your field. It belongs to Boaz or whoever's field, right? The Torah did not say it's your own private space, and therefore this rule of Reish Lakish doesn't apply in the case of payah. And that's why payah is not a question. You're basically in somebody else's reshut, and so you don't get your arba amot. You only get what you pick up. And you didn't pick it up, you just fell on it, and therefore you're not kohen. Says, that was the first question from the Mishnah and Peah. Says Rava, 5 lines from the top, motiv Rabbi Yaakov Aridi. Rabbi Yaakov Aridi asked a question on Reish Lakish from our Mishnah in Nizikin, the Mishnah we just had, right? What is it? Now we're quoting our Mishnah. Ra'at Metzia, you see a beautiful diamond ring on the ground, right? Then nafalo, and you jump on top of it, and you didn't pick it up, right? You got your body on top of it. When someone else comes and grabs it out from under you, says our Mishnah, the one who picked it up gets it. I want to get it. If it's true what Reish Lakish said, that 4 amot are your space everywhere, you're on top of it. Your arba amot certainly should be kohen of the thing. How could someone come and get it from under you? It says the same answer. That is only the case if you intend to use your space to be a kohen. Person didn't say, I want to acquire it with my personal space. And ask the Gemara, just like we did in Amud Aleph, takun Rabbanan, kilo amar my havi. Right? If the Rabbanan make this takana, who cares if you say anything, right? Kivan de nafal aleh, so answers the Gemara, Kivan de nafal aleh, since you jumped on top of it, it's clear what your intention is. Gali daite, it clarifies your intention, that your intention is to acquire it by being on top of it, which is wrong. You can't acquire something by being on top of it, and therefore it's not yours. And right, so that is, again, the first answer, is that you, by jumping on it, you basically negated your kinyan of space, because you thought, I'm going to own this by possessing it, but possessing it means holding it, and so therefore you're not kohen. Now that's one answer. And Rav Sheshet gives a second answer, and he says, and this goes back, you could say this in the first case as well, that kitakina Rabbanan, the Rabbanan made this rule bisimta. Simta means like I mean, in English, but like a alleyway almost, meaning they used to have big public roads, right? Like the Henry Hudson Parkway, which they didn't have as big, but that space, and that's public, everyone's, that's free for all. You can't stand there. Animals are going down. There's, as we've learned many times, a lot of animals are going to the bathroom there, people are coming by, but that's the Rishut HaRabim. On the sides, you would have like these excursions where people could go and sort of be private. So that's called a simta. So there, you don't expect people to be. And so it's reasonable to say you have personal space there. But in the middle of a public area, you can't say, which is where you found the diamond ring in the middle of the road, you can't say this is my public space. Everyone gets to go here. Now, everyone can go in the simta too, but it's not highly trafficked. So it says Rav Sheshet, takina Rabbanan, the Rabbanan made a takana that you get arba amot, that's besimta. That is in the alleyways, the sides of the roads, the lodachti rabim, where there aren't a lot of people crushing you. But Rishut HaRabim, but you can't walk into Madison Square Garden and say, I got 4 amot, right? That would be unreasonable. But Rishut HaRabim, l'kadachti rabim, you're being pushed and you're being crowded by the public. Lo takina Rabbanan, there's no takana. Ask the Gemara now, if you recall, what Reish Lakish said, interestingly, right after the Mishnah, was Arba Ama Konetlo Bikol Makom. What did Bikol Makom implies everywhere. So how can you start making these exceptions? Ask the Gemara, what about the fact that he said, Bikol Makom Ka'amar? He said everywhere. No, Kol Makom meant La Tuyeh Tzidei Rishut HaRabim. That includes the sides, right? So you have a road, and we've had this many times, especially in Shabbos, right? You have the main part of the road. You have the sides of the road where maybe the auxiliary road almost in our Henry Hudson part, example. So there it's less crowded, but it's still, more public place. There, as Reish Lakish said, you are kohen. But if you come to the middle of the road where everyone's passing, you don't get arba amot space. And therefore, if you find a Metzia there, just jumping on it is not enough to give you ownership.
That doesn't fix payah because that's not the main.
It doesn't fix payah. Right, unless it's a highly trafficked area, but it's not a Rishut HaRabim.
It's not the corner.
It's not the same issue. Yeah, but there are many people coming.
This, there are two things here. One is this shows again that Reshut Harabim has different meanings depending on the context. It's not necessarily, the definition Shabbat is not necessarily the same here. And this, we
Correct.
see that elsewhere. And also, paya is from public domain. You don't have paya that is essentially the paya is becoming ownerless. Well, it's weird. It's not exactly
Right. That's what Rosa was pointing out. The pay is a unique thing because you've been given
Yeah.
license to go into someone's field. That's a private field, though, right?
yeah.
And remains private after the fact, right? But you're allowed to
Reshut
go.
Harabim is not private.
Correct. And that's
Yeah.
what Metzia is, right? In general, you can't find a diamond ring in somebody else's living room, right? That would not be a find.
Yeah, it's not yours.
That's what we call it. Okay. Continues the Gemara. Amar Reish Lakish, Mishum Abba Kahana Bardala. A second statement that Reish Lakish said from Abba Kahana Bardala is very interesting halacha. This, we're going to do it quickly because it's Daf Yomi. But this, it leads to discussions throughout Shas. Said Reish Lakish, Kitana in la chatzer. A minor woman does not have a concept of a chatzer. If you recall, right, a person, one of the big challenges is or discussions is divorce, right? The Torah says in order to divorce a woman, you have to give her a get, right? And the Mishnah we've discussed this many times, and we're going to discuss again in a second. You don't necessarily have to give it to her. You can give it to her messenger, or you can throw it into her courtyard, and her courtyard is her possession. Now, what if the person you married is 9 years old and you want to divorce them, right? So remember, we learned in Gittin that a ketana who could be shomer a get is considered old enough to accept a get, right? If she's 2, you can't give a get. But someone who can observe, knows what that piece of paper is, can get a get. Said Reish Lakish, but you can't throw it into her yard. You'd have to hand it to her, right? Kitana ein la chatzer, she could have a yard. The ein la arba amot, and she doesn't have the halacha of arba amot, because the same halacha is true by a woman that if you throw the get or you give her the get within arba amot, she's koneh. But that's not true by a minor. Why not? And that's Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Yanai, no, I disagree. Yesh la chatzer v'yesh la arba amot, that a minor woman can get a get in her chatzer and can get a get if you put it within arba amot. But my commitment, now what's the basis of the machlok Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan? Mar, or the people they quoted, Mar Savar, one opinion is Chatzer Mishum Yada et Rabbi. Right? How in the world can you put something in someone's Chatzer and say, I gave it to you? So one opinion is that that's considered to be the extension of their hand. Just like their house, it's their place. So the Chatzer is their hand, basically. And Kihecha the Itla Yad, just like a woman who's 9 years old or a minor has a hand, Chatzer Nami Itla, so her yard is also her hand. You can hand it to her. Not everyone agrees works. You can also put it in her Chatzer. That's Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. But Reish Lakish holds Mar Savar, Chatzar Mishum Shlichut Rabbi. A chatzar becomes your messenger. It's not your hand. It's your, inanimate is added, is included. So we include your chatzar as being your space because it's considered to be a messenger for you. It's a shliach. It's your agent, essentially. Okay, now why would it matter, right? Anyways, let's keep going. We'll see. That a chatzar works Mishum Shlichut it Rabbi. That a chatzer is included in halacha because it essentially a chatzer is something that is your messenger. And just like a minor can't make a messenger, right? A girl who's not an adult doesn't have dat to say to someone else, do this for me. So kihecha to shlichut letla, since she doesn't have the ability to make a shliach, chatzer nami letla. She also cannot make her yard an agent to accept the get for her, and the only way to give a get to a minor, according to Reish Lakish and Abba Kahana Bardala, is to hand it to her. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Let's unpack this a little bit. Mika manda amar chatzer mishum shlichut rabbi. Does anybody say that a chatzer works because essentially you've assigned it to be your messenger and said, this space is acting in loco of me? Tanya, we had a halacha, again in Bava Kama, of the pasuk says, "Im himatzei timatzei biyado." Right? If you find a geneva, someone steals something, and you find it in his hand, then you pay kefa. So does that mean you literally have to find it in his hand? So it said the Braita in Bava Kama biyado, ainli ela yado. I only know if you find the geneva in someone's pocket, right? How do you know if you find it in his house? Gago, chatzero, karfifo is his roof, his yard, skarfef, which is his other yard, minayin, that's also considered to be something that's a geneva, and you have to pay kefel, and of course you have to pay it back, but you have to pay kefel. Talmulomar, ti matzei mikomakom. It says a double language. Anywhere you find it, and of course, as long as it's still in his possession, right? Because if someone steals something and gets rid of it, you don't pay kefel anymore. You pay one, but you don't pay kefel. But any place. Now, says the Gemara, think about it. If a chatzer works because essentially I establish my chatzer as my messenger, then you're saying if you find the stolen thing in my chatzer, I have to pay kefel because my messenger stole it or my messenger has it. But remember, the principle is ein shliach ledvar avera. So how could the messenger, in this case being the inanimate field, right, yard, be chayav for you if you can't be a messenger for dvar avera, right? If we add a chatzer as being part of your responsibility because it's your messenger, imkain matzina shliach ledvar avera. Then it's saying that because your messenger has the stolen thing, you got to pay kefel, right? Your messenger stole it or is in possession of the stolen thing. So obviously, you can't say that a chatzer is kona because it's your messenger, because then it wouldn't make any sense for stolen things for kefel. Says Ravina, one second, you're getting things very confused here. The only time, the reason, why do we say you can't have a shliach d'var avera? If I go to someone and say, go and steal something from me, right? And they go and they steal it from me and bring it to my house, I'm not chayav because they can't be my shliach or d'var avera. Says Rabina, you know why that is? That's heicha de shliach bar chiyuvo. That's only if the shliach also is not allowed to do this thing. So if I say to them, do it, and they go and do it, they're basically accepting responsibility on themselves, right? And however, aval chatzer d'lav bar chiyuvahu, right? In a chatzer, again, this is very funny because we're talking about a chatzer as a object, right? As a person, the chatzer can't. There's no prohibition in the Torah saying if you're a field, don't steal from another field, right? Or don't steal from someone else. Obviously, fields don't have responsibilities, or your yard doesn't have responsibilities. So a chatzer, which is a lav bar chiyuvo, it's not responsible for stealing. There, mechayev sholcho. There, if I make my yard my messenger, I, as the person who made it my messenger, is chayav. The only time that a shliach can't be chayav is where the shliach themselves is not allowed to do the act. But in this case, since the shliach, which is your yard in this case, has no prohibition against stealing, therefore your shliach actually can do the act, and therefore you, the messenger, the one who sent him, the mashaleach, are chayav. So yesh shliach d'var avera in this case. Says where, whoa, think about the extension of that. Elamiata, what if a person says to a woman, remember a wife, we learned this in Bava Kama, who steals, is not chayav. Her husband's chayav, right? So, or a servant who steals does not have to pay back. Elamiata, omer isha ve'evet. Let's say a person says to his wife or to a slave, Tzu'u ganvuli, go and steal from me, right? So in that case, they're not going to have to pay back the lav b'nei chiyuv. They're not going to have to pay back the loan, the stealing. So then you're saying, since they don't have to pay back, they can be a messenger for me, and therefore I'm chayav for what they do. So then you should say that the one who sends them is chayav. Now you might ask, maybe that's the case, but we've never heard that be the case before. So that if a man says to his wife, go steal from me, and she does it, according to your logic, the husband would be chayav when that's not the case. She's an individual person who did it. So remember, that's not equivalent at all to the chatzer. Because Amrit Isha ve'eved b'nei chiyuv v'ninu. Of course, a woman can't steal. It's just that she doesn't have ownership of her own money to pay it back. And remember, we said in the Mishnah in Bava Kama, Hashtamiya let l'shlumi. She just can't pay now because everything she owns is owned by her husband. It's not. And the Mishnah, of course, said in the end of Bava Kama, not the end, but near the end, Nitgarsha Isha. If a woman steals, she can't pay back because everything goes to her husband. But if she then gets divorced, or nishtachrera eved, or you free the slave, chayav in the shalim, then they do have to pay. So it's not that the woman didn't have to pay; it's that she couldn't pay. So she certainly can't be a shliach d'var avera, right?
Well, then he has to pay, right? Isn't he chayav?
Well, one second. No, if he sent her, if a man said to his wife, "Go steal for me," and she went and stole, he doesn't have to pay because ain't shliach d'var avera, right?
But she's not counted here because everything belongs to him, and then he's really the one who's chayav.
So he doesn't have to pay because ain't shliach d'var avera. She doesn't have to pay because she has no money to pay, unless she had money. But usually, if she has no money to pay, you can't take his money to make her pay. But if she gets divorced,
why isn't this like the courtyard? You consider a quote unquote like an inanimate object.
So 1 second.
And then he would be chayev.
So the difference here is what we're saying is that ein shliach l'dvar avera. Ask the Gemara, if a courtyard works through a shliach, how could that be, right? Then it's the shliach l'dvar avera. And we said, well, a courtyard might be a shliach because the only time we say ein shliach l'dvar avera is if the shliach themselves, right, is allowed to do the thing. And since the courtyard can do the thing, so to speak, there's no prohibition on the courtyard stealing, therefore, yesh shliach l'dvar avera. So I'm going to ask your question. So then if a woman steals, a wife steals, or Eved, let's say, right, since the Eved won't be chayiv to pay back, right, so then you should say yesh shliach l'dvar avera. And answer the Gemara, the Eved, of course, is chayiv to pay back. They just don't have any ability to pay back. So the Eved is not like the yard. The yard has no responsibility to pay back. Even if the yard becomes a person one day in the Wizard of Oz, right, the yard is not going to have to pay back. But an Eved certainly has a responsibility. Says the Gemara, we'll get to the case in a second where someone doesn't. Rav Sama said, I have a better answer or another answer for why a yard is not considered to be shliach l'dvar avera. Because heicha d'amrinan in shliach l'dvar avera, when you say you can't be a messenger for a sin, heicha di'ibai avid, ibai lo avid. That has to do with agency, right? It's where you say to someone, go and steal from me. You know what? That person has free will and they have a choice of what to do.
Yeah.
They can either take it or not take it. And if they decide to do it, it's not on you. Because remember, the halacha is divrei harav, divrei hatalmid, right? If you've got the Rav, meaning God, and you've got the Talmid, meaning the person who sent them, divrei mishomin. You should listen to the one above, right? So there you can't say, I told someone to steal from me. I had no expectation they were going to do it because why would they listen to me, right? So that's only where a person can make a choice. Obviously, your chatzer that you said to your chatzer, would you please let me put this thing down here? The chatzer cannot reject you, right? There's no such thing. It's not animate, right? So therefore, says Rav Sama, when you say right? If you want to do it or not, you have a choice. Right? Motifla. The chatzer, you put it there, and the chatzer has no will in this. Mechayev shulcho. There you are chayev for sending it. Says my beinayo, what's the difference between these two answers? Between whether a chatzer can be a shliach because it is not chayav in the act, the first answer, or because it has no choice in the act. The difference would be this fascinating case. Ika beinayo kohen damar le Yisrael tzedei kadesh isha. A man is a kohen. He's not allowed to marry isha grusha. Sorry, he's not allowed to marry a divorcee. Right? If he goes and gives kiddushin to a woman who's divorced, he's over a lotase. Right? So he says to his friend, who's not a kohen, right? Can you go over and marry that woman on my behalf? So now think about this. That person you gave it to has choice, right? They could do it or not do it. But they're not chayav. There's no chayav for a person who's a Yisrael giving kiddushin to a grusha on behalf of a kohen. Or a second case, inami ishtam le isha akvi le katan. I love this case. A man says to a woman, "Can you give a haircut to this kid?" Right? Remember, lo takifu pat roshchem. You're not allowed to cut off the corners of your head. That we learned in the Gemara, it only applies to men. Women can cut off their whole head, right? All their hair. And because a woman's allowed to cut off their own hair, they can actually do it to somebody else. The only prohibition is if you can't do it to yourself, you can't do it to somebody else. And mainly because it's the prohibition is not having it done to you, the prohibition is doing it. Lo takifu ba'at roshchem. And we learned also in the Gemara, interestingly, that there's a prohibition of a person doing it to a minor. Because since the minor's not chayav, it's the person doing the hakafa. So let's say you say to your wife, I can't give a haircut to our kid. That's prohibited according to the Torah, but you can, right? So go cut off the hair for that kid. So now the question is she doing shlichut for him? So she has a choice to do it or not do it, right? So you'd say, okay, so ein shliach l'dvar avera. Or would you say, she's not prohibited from doing this? So yesh shliach l'dvar avera, and he's over the lotase of hakafa because he asked her to do it and she did it for him. So which would you say? No,
and the kid's not high because the kid is not.
The kid will never be high.
Any mitzvah.
So Rashi points out here. Tosfos has a little bit of a different opinion. Rashi says, of course, there's nothing to do with the kid here. You can hire a woman to be a barber to cut off the hair of an adult. Rashi says no man would ever let a woman cut his hair, right? So it must be a kid or something, or maybe against his will. But anyways, says in our lahach lishna. I love that case. 7 lines from the bottom. Lahach lishna. According to the answer. The Amar kol heicha dibai avid dibai lo avid lo mechayev sholcho. That you never are mechayev the sender of the message, right? The mishaleach. If the messenger has free will, has choice, they can do it or not do it. So hachanami in all these cases, either the person can do it or not do it. Ibay avad, ibay lo avad. And therefore, the one who sent them is not chayiv. Lo mechayiv shulchan, because ein shliach l'dvar avera, right? And they have their own choice. But
There's no avera here, though, right? If the woman cuts the hair for the boy,
no, but there's no avera for the man.
What?
But if it's a message for the man, if you view it as the man doing the act through a messenger, then there certainly is an avera, right? Because the man sent a messenger to cut off the hair of a child, of anyone, right?
But if we say ein shaliach l'davar avera, and she does it on her own, and she's not doing an avera because there's no isser for the woman
Correct.
to do this.
That's correct. But that's the first answer. But lahach nisha says there are 4 lines on the bottom who say that kol heicha de shliach lav bar chiyuvo, that wherever the shliach is not personally responsible for this action, then mechayev sholcho. Then that person's like, I'm happy to give a haircut. There's nothing wrong with that. So then the one who sent them is in fact liable for their action, right? Because they are their own messenger. So hani nami in this case too, kiva delav v'nei chiyuva ninu, right? Since the person doing it, the Yisrael marrying, giving kiddushin to the grusha, or the woman cutting the hair of the child, since they are not chayav for that act, mechayav shochan, then the one who sent them is in fact chayav, and you would say yesh shliach l'dvar avera in this case. And so the man would get punished and get lashes, presumably.
That's crazy.
Right? Because he sent a messenger who's allowed to do it and said, you're my messenger, go cut off this kid's hair. He's not allowed to do it. He sent someone else to do it who themselves is allowed to do it, and therefore he is chayav. I don't know if we paskin that way, but that would be a fascinating.
But how do you make him chayav here? Still.
Because it's essentially he did it. It's because if you remember, everywhere else, your shliach does that. You say to shliach, go buy a field for me, you own the field. So essentially, in this case, this person is your hand, right? That's what a shliach is. You basically you cut off the hair yourself. Now, obviously, we always say ein shliach l'dvar avera, but it's possible that we only say ein shliach l'dvar avera when the shliach themselves shouldn't be doing the act, right? And therefore, you can say, I did not expect them to do it for me. I begged them and paid them and cajoled them, but I thought that when push comes to shove, they're not going to do it for me because they're going to listen to God. But you have no excuse in this case. There's no God for them to listen to because they are butter.
I don't think we were posting that it's gonna any person could make their kid go do something for them and then they wouldn't.
Okay, that's
Like, because then you could be like, go steal this from your neighbors and they don't have the.
right. So whether this would apply in cases where the kid is a child who,
But still, there's no avera for them. You see what I mean? Once
there's
it's
no avera for the
transferred,
woman who cut the hair, but there's an
What?
avera for the man because he cut a child's hair through a messenger, through a shliach. Again, if you view it, think about the marriage case, right? A Kohen's marrying a grusha in this case. If the marriage is effective, then he's over for marrying her. He's going to say, what do you mean? It should never work because it's a prohibition, but there was no prohibition for the one who did it. So then you'd be chayav. Let's just finish to the Mishnah because we want to not leave too much for tomorrow. Ask the Gemara, well, 1 second. This whole discussion about your chatzer, your yard works because either it's a shliach for you or it's your hand. That's why, is that really true? It sounds very academic. Is there any opinion that says chatzer lav mishum yada, Rabbi? The chatzer is not, in fact, your hand. But Tanya, right, the pasuk by a woman who gets a get, it says natan liyada. And the Braita says in Gittin, yada, you have to give the get to her hand. Ainli ela yada. I only know you have to give it to her hand. Gaga chatzera karfifa minayin. How do you know that you can also put it on her roof, in her yard, etc.? We learn from the word natan, any way you give it to her, right? Now, clearly that means her hand. By a get, you have to put it in her hand. Says where you're right. Clearly from the pasuk, we know that by get, a chatzir works because it is her hand, right? Ki pligi, the question was, Metzia. What about in regards to an object that is found, meaning get is isser, is status of isser v'heter. What about in regards to finding an object or money, right? That's where Mar Savar turns to the top of Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. One opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, in his opinion, is Yalfinan Metzia Miget. We learn out money from get, and therefore it's also through Yada. Umar Savar Lo Yalfinan Metzia Miget. And Rish Lakish is of the opinion from Abakana Bardala that we don't learn Metzia from get. And of course, remember, the implication of that is that, remember, if a chatzer is Mishum Yad, then even a minor can have a chatzer. If a chatzer is Mishum Shliach, then a minor can't have a chatzer, right? And that's the machloket. and actually some are say, so the katana kuliyamalo pligi. You know what? By a young girl, by a minor girl, everyone agrees that since a get, which we say everyone agrees, chatzer works, so everyone agrees you can give her the get in her chatzer, because it's mishum yada, then your yalfina metzia miget. You can also give her a metzia in her chatzer, because since the chatzer works for her for a get, it will work for her for money, right? The question is, what if he's a boy, right? Can you give a boy property in his own chatzer? Mar Savar, one opinion, Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is Yalfina Katan Miktana, that they seem very similar. Umar Savar, Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo Yalfina Katan Miktana. We learn this halacha by a girl because she needs it for a get. Obviously, a boy has no equivalent for a get, and therefore a boy never has halacha that his chatzer is his hand, and therefore you couldn't give him money in his chatzer, right? You don't learn it out. And it's also possible that in fact Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish don't even argue, that they're talking about two different cases. One is referring to a chatzer for gittin, and everyone agrees that that's mishum yada, and one is referring to chatzer for money, and that's where they agree that's mishum shliach, and since a kid can't have a shliach, you can't give a kid money through putting it in their chatzer. And we'll stop at the Mishnah. Now, we have an important discussion about tomorrow. So Charlie and I and Rosa, three of us, would greatly prefer to learn at regular time, 7:45 a.m. tomorrow. The question is that too early for those who are losing an hour of sleep tonight?
For me, it's not a question of losing sleep. Here in Lakewood, they daven at 7, and being Rosh Chodesh, davening is probably not going to be over until about 8:15 or so.
Oh, wow.
But you have to do what's best for Riverdale. I could always catch up on a recording.
Okay, let's see. Ken, does it work for you?
And I don't know if the earliest minyan in Riverdale is 6:30. I don't know if they'll be done by. They might be done.
7:45? They'll be done by 7:45.
What?
7:45 they'll be done by.
Probably.
I don't think they'll go more. I mean, it's a weekday Rosh Chodesh, even though it's Sunday. Okay, so 7:45 a.m. Hope everyone, I guess Robert will see you on the Zoom, but on the video recording, but
All right, I'll see it on YouTube.
YouTube. Okay, God willing, I hope I don't oversleep. So I hope to see everyone tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I hope I don't oversleep either. I gotta set an alarm.
Okay, we'll see you then, I hope.
Good luck.
Chodesh Tov.
Shavua Tov.